It was the kind of December night that bit at your bones, the streets veiled in mist and a cold too sharp to ignore. I was returning from work later than usual, my breath curling in pale clouds before me as the world around grew quieter with every step. When I turned onto my street, I saw it immediately. An envelope resting on my doorstep, the faint glow of streetlights illuminating its golden shimmer. I hesitated. No one left me letters. Yet, there it was, pristine despite the damp cold. Something about it made me shiver, though I couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the red wax seal, unbroken and emblazoned with an intricate emblem, a wreath of thorns encircling a single star. I knelt, cradling the envelope in my hands. The texture was unusual, velvety, as though it had absorbed the frost rather than fought against it. My name was written in a sharp, flowing script that seemed to leer at me. To the seeker. Inside was a card so ornate it might have come from another century. The crimson ink was striking against the black backdrop. The words stark. Find what you truly seek. Beneath it, a map was scrawled, a route through streets I recognized, though one name stood out. Evergreen Alley. That name didn't exist, not here. The instructions were simple. The market opened only at midnight, and I was invited to attend. The air seemed to grow colder as I stared at the card, my pulse quickening with a mix of apprehension and an inexplicable pull. I should have tossed it, ignored the ridiculous notion of following directions to some phantom Christmas market. But curiosity had a way of digging its claws into me. Perhaps it was exhaustion or the monotony of my life gnawing at me, but the thought of something different, something unexpected, was intoxicating. By the time the clock struck 11:30, I'd made my decision. Bundling into my thickest coat, I pocketed the map and ventured into the night. The walk felt strange, the world eerily still, as though the city had gone to sleep without me. Snowflakes drifted lazily, their beauty dulled by the thick mist curling through the streets. Following the map, I found myself drawn toward a darker part of town, the roads narrowing until they became little more than cobbled paths. And then, as if out of nowhere, Evergreen Alley appeared. The mist parted like a curtain to reveal an archway framed in flickering fairy lights, the bulbs dim and yellowed as if they'd burned for decades. Beyond the arch stretched a winding maze of wooden stalls, their roofs dusted with snow, their goods glinting faintly beneath lanterns swinging in a phantom wind. Something about the place felt wrong. The air was heavy, humming with an energy I couldn't place. But the pull was stronger. I stepped inside. The market seemed alive. Not with the bustling energy of holiday cheer, but with something quieter, darker, more insidious. Every stall exuded its own peculiar charm, the vendors watching passers-by with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. There were no shouts to lure in customers, no jingles of bells or merry chatter. Just the low murmur of voices and the occasional rustle of fabric. I wandered, drawn to the strange wares on display, ornaments that shimmered with an unnatural light, wreaths woven with withered vines that seemed to twitch in the corner of my eye, candles that burned black but smelled like cinnamon and pine. Each item seemed to whisper to me, promising something just out of reach. At one stall, a woman with hair like cobwebs and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes tried to sell me a snow globe. "Shake it," she purred, her voice as soft as the falling snow. "See the world as it truly is." I moved on, my unease mounting. The deeper I ventured into the market, the darker it seemed to grow. The flickering lanterns cast long, twisting shadows, and the cold bit sharper with each step. That was when I saw it. The stall stood at the very end of the market, its structure taller than the others, draped in tattered garlands that swayed gently as though touched by invisible hands. The vendor, A man whose hollow cheeks made him appear cadaverous beckoned me closer with the crook of his finger. "You found it," he said, his voice oily and slick, the kind of tone that made my stomach churn. "What you've been looking for." I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him I wasn't searching for anything, but my words caught in my throat as my gaze landed on the music box. It was beautiful, carved from dark wood and adorned with intricate engravings of twisting vines and tiny stars. A single crank jutted out from its side, delicate and gilded. The lid was slightly ajar, and though I hadn't touched it, a faint melody trickled out, a tune so haunting it made my chest tighten. "It's perfect for you," the vendor murmured, pushing the box closer. "Take it. It's meant for your hands. I should have left. I knew I should have left, but my hands moved of their own accord, lifting the music box as if it had been waiting for me all along. The wood was warm against my palms, almost pulsing, and the melody grew louder as I held it. "How much?" I asked, though my voice sounded distant, hollow. The vendor's grin stretched impossibly wide. "No charge. It's already yours." The moment he wrapped it in a sheet of brittle paper, he leaned close, his breath icy against my skin. "Good luck, Seeker. You'll need it." I left the market in a daze, the music box tucked under my arm. It wasn't until I stepped back onto the silent streets of the city that I realized I couldn't hear my footsteps, only the faint, haunting melody playing softly, over and over. The music box sat on my coffee table, an innocuous object under the dim glow of my living room lamp. I couldn't stop staring at it, the strange carvings catching the light, casting distorted shapes on the walls. The melody played faintly, though I hadn't touched the crank since bringing it home. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The tune was so soft it seemed like the hum of an old radiator, barely audible but always present. But as the hours crept toward dawn, it grew louder, threading itself into the fabric of the room, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I tried to distract myself, switching on the TV, but the usual noise of late-night reruns seemed muted, as though the melody absorbed every other sound. Even my breathing felt too quiet, muffled beneath that haunting tune. Around 3 a.m., I gave in to the pull of the box. My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid, revealing the delicate mechanism inside. The tiny gears moved with unnatural precision, the crank turning of its own accord, the melody spilling out stronger now. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a soft waltz that seemed to belong to another era. Yet there was something wrong with it, an offbeat note that threw the entire tune into dissonance. The more I listened, the more I felt the walls of the room closing in, as if the music had taken control of the space itself. I snapped the lid shut. The melody stopped instantly, but the silence that followed was worse. It wasn't the comforting stillness of a sleeping house. It was heavy, oppressive, as though the room held its breath, waiting. I turned off the lamp and climbed into bed, telling myself I'd been awake too long, that my mind was playing tricks on me. Yet sleep refused to come. The melody burrowed its way into my thoughts, looping endlessly, a phantom echo that seemed to grow louder the more I tried to block it out. Sometime after 5 a.m., I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The dream came in flashes. I was running through a forest, the trees barren and skeletal, their branches clawing at the starless sky. Snow crunched beneath my feet, but it was black, staining my boots with ash-like smudges. The melody played all around me, louder than ever, its dissonant notes sharp enough to pierce my thoughts. Ahead, the trees parted, revealing a clearing bathed in faint, silvery light. At its center stood a figure, a man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that burned like embers. He was cradling the music box, his skeletal fingers caressing its surface with an almost tender reverence. "Why did you take it?" His voice was a low growl, reverberating through the clearing. I didn't mean to," I stammered, my words swallowed by the endless melody. "You sought it out," he said, his lips curling into a grin that was all teeth and malice. "Now it seeks you." The melody swelled, deafening now, drowning out everything else. The man's grin stretched wider as the forest began to collapse around me, the trees folding inward like paper, the light fading until all that remained was the music. I woke gasping, my heart racing. The melody still played, faint but unmistakable, filling the room even though the music box was still closed. The next morning, I tried to rid myself of it. I wrapped the box in a thick layer of newspaper and shoved it into the farthest corner of my closet. For good measure, I covered it with an old blanket, as though hiding it might weaken its grip on me. It didn't work. By midday, the melody was back, louder than before, seeping through the walls of my apartment like a malignant spirit. It followed me from room to room, growing stronger the farther I moved from the closet. I tried throwing it out. I stuffed the box into a trash bag, tied it tight, and dropped it into the dumpster behind my building. But when I returned to my apartment, it was waiting for me. The music box sat on my coffee table once again, its lid slightly ajar, the melody spilling out like an accusation. A cold dread settled over me. It wasn't just a cursed object. It was something more, something alive, and it wasn't going to let me go. That night, the dreams returned. This time, I wasn't running. I was standing in the forest clearing, the music box in my hands, its melody louder than ever. The gaunt man stood before me, his hollow eyes boring into mine. "You can't leave," he said, his voice low and resonant. "Not until the song is finished." I woke screaming, the melody still playing, louder than ever. The melody had become inescapable, an unrelenting presence in my life. It was louder now, sharper, cutting through every moment of quiet like the scrape of a blade against glass. I barely slept, and when I did, the dreams were worse. Visions of twisted trees, hollow-eyed figures, and the endless, looping waltz that tightened its grip on my sanity. Desperation pushed me to act. I couldn't live like this anymore. The music box wasn't just a nuisance. It was a parasite, feeding on my thoughts, warping the world around me. I had to find a way to break its hold. I scoured the internet for anything that might explain the box's origin or offer a clue about how to stop it. I found nothing but vague legends, warnings about cursed objects, and cryptic stories about a place called the Dark Christmas Market. The name sent a chill through me. The descriptions matched perfectly. The labyrinth of shadowy stalls, the unnatural goods, the vendors who seemed less than human. But every source repeated the same grim truth. Once the market chose you, there was no escape. I refused to accept that. The melody played louder, taunting me, as I rifled through the pages of my search. Then, buried in a forgotten corner of an old forum, I found a post that gave me a sliver of hope. The market reappears to those it has cursed, but only if they seek it. The item must be returned to its stall. Only then will the bond be broken. But beware, returning it demands a price. A price, Bow. The words churned uneasily in my mind, but I couldn't dwell on them. I had no choice. If I didn't return the music box, it would consume me. That night, I ventured out, the map from the velvet invitation clutched in one hand and the cursed music box in the other. The streets were darker than I remembered, the familiar glow of streetlights dimmed, as though the world itself wanted to keep me blind. The melody grew louder with every step, pulling me forward like a leash around my neck. The snow fell in thick, silent flakes, muffling every sound except the cursed tune. My breath fogged the air in quick, shallow bursts as I retraced the route to Evergreen Alley. Every step heavier than the last, and then I saw it. The archway flickered into existence as if summoned by my need, the dim, yellowed lights trembling in the bitter wind. Beyond the arch, the market loomed. more sinister than before. The stalls leaned at impossible angles, their decorations tattered and swaying as though caught in a storm that only they could feel. I stepped through the archway, the music box clutched tightly against my chest. The air inside the market was thick, choking, and it carried the faint scent of burning pine. The vendors turned to watch me as I passed, their eyes glinting like shards of glass, their expressions unreadable. "Returning, are we?" one of them crooned, a hunched figure draped in moth-eaten robes. "You always come back." I ignored them, the music box's melody pounding in my ears. It seemed louder here, angrier, as though it resented my decision. I reached the stall where I had first found it. The vendor was waiting, his hollow face twisted into something that might have been a smile. "Ah," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You've brought it back." The music box trembled in my hands, the melody warping into something frantic and chaotic. For a moment, I thought it might break apart in my grasp, but the vendor's long, spindly fingers closed over mine, steadying them. "It doesn't want to leave you," he murmured. "But you've made your choice, haven't you?" "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "Take it back." The vendor's grin stretched wider, revealing too many teeth. "You know there's a price," he said. "The market doesn't give without taking." "What do you want?" I whispered. He leaned closer, his breath icy against my skin. "A memory," he said. "A precious one. Your most cherished Christmas moment." The words struck like a blow. I thought of the warmth of my childhood, the glow of lights on the tree, the sound of my mother's laughter as we decorated together. Could I give that up? Could I lose the only part of the holiday that still meant something to me? The melody twisted again, desperate now, as though begging me to refuse. "Choose," the vendor hissed. "The music box or the memory?" Tears pricked at my eyes as I nodded. "Take it," I said, my voice cracking. "Take the memory." The vendor's fingers brushed my forehead, and in an instant, the warmth was gone. I felt the absence like a wound, a hollowness in my chest where joy had once lived. The music box went silent, the melody vanishing as though it had never existed. The vendor tucked the box beneath his stall, his grin fading into indifference. "It's done," he said. "Go." I stumbled out of the market, the archway disappearing behind me. I was free. But as I walked home through the snow, the silence felt heavier than the melody had ever been. And in the faint distance, just barely audible, I thought I heard the waltz begin to play again. The house was quiet when I returned, a hollow sort of stillness that should have been comforting. Yet, as I shut the door behind me, it felt as though the melody's absence had carved a void into the very air. The music box was gone, its relentless waltz silenced, but the weight of my decision lingered, pressing down like an invisible shroud. I stood in the dim light of the entryway, staring at the Christmas tree in the corner of the room. Its soft glow used to warm me, but now it felt distant, meaningless. I reached for the ornament I had hung every year, the one my mother had given me when I was 5. It was still there, fragile and sparkling, but as my fingers brushed its surface, no memories came. The ache was immediate, sharp as a knife. I couldn't remember her laughter, the way her hands had carefully wrapped each gift. The sound of her favorite carols was a hollow echo in my mind, unreachable, untouchable. I fell into the armchair, head in my hands, trying to summon even a fragment of what I had given away. But it was gone, all of it. And then, in the silence, I heard it. It wasn't the music box's melody, not quite. It was faint, a distorted echo of the tune, seeping through the walls like a phantom. My breath hitched as I strained to listen, hoping I was imagining it. But it grew louder, not from a single source but all around me. As though the house itself had learned the song. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "It's gone. It's over." The shadows in the room seemed to twist at the edges, curling inward like ink bleeding through paper. The sound of the waltz grew clearer, sharper, each note resonating in my chest. I bolted upright, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Stop it!" I shouted, my voice cracking in the empty room. The music didn't stop. The tree lights flickered, casting erratic patterns on the walls. The glow stretched and twisted, forming shapes that didn't belong. Elongated limbs and faces with gaping mouths, their features melting into the shadows. The room grew colder, the warmth of the house leaching away until I could see my breath curling in the dim light. I stumbled backward, my movement sluggish, as though the air itself had thickened. That's when I saw it. The music box was on the coffee table, its lid closed but trembling, as though something inside was fighting to escape. I had returned it, but it was back, and this time, the melody was different. It was angrier, each note laced with malice. A scraping sound drew my attention to the walls, where the shadows began to peel away, stretching toward the center of the room. They moved unnaturally, jerking and twisting like broken puppets. I stumbled away from the table, my back hitting the cold plaster of the far wall. "You took it back!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "You said it was over!" The shadows didn't answer. Instead, they swirled around the music box, their forms coalescing into a tall, gaunt figure. I recognized him immediately. The man from my dreams, with hollow eyes and that twisted grin. "You paid the price," he said, his voice a low rumble that shook the floor beneath me. "But you didn't read the fine print." "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the now deafening waltz. He stepped closer, his skeletal fingers hovering over the box. "The market takes what it's owed, but the bond isn't broken. You return the box, but the music remains. And now," he said, his grin widening, "you are the song." The shadows surged forward, wrapping around me in a suffocating embrace. The waltz filled my ears, louder than ever, its discordant notes weaving through my thoughts, drowning out my screams. I clawed at the darkness, but it was everywhere, pouring into my mouth, my nose, my eyes. And then, suddenly, there was nothing. I awoke in a cold, empty street. The snow fell gently around me, the lights of Evergreen Alley glowing faintly in the distance. The music box was gone, but the melody hummed softly in my mind, a constant, inescapable loop. When I tried to speak, the words came out in song, each syllable part of the waltz, every breath tied to the cursed melody. I stumbled to my feet, my limbs sluggish, my thoughts fragmented. As I turned toward the archway, I saw the market vendors waiting, their hollow faces alight with cruel amusement. Behind them, the shadowed stalls stretched endlessly, waiting for the next seeker to wander in. And I knew, with a sinking dread, that my part in the waltz had only just begun.